Dante, we are in a cold storage facility in South Pharr or Hidalgo, not sure which city.
That's far.
We're in Pharr, okay. What's been happening today?
So what we've been talking about is the importance of the tomato suspension agreement and what it means, not just to our community and our region, but what it means to all of America. So the Department of Commerce has said that in the next 90 days, they are looking to withdraw from this agreement. The agreement has been in place for more than 30 years. This agreement is important because what it does is it establishes trade guidelines for Mexican tomatoes intended for grocery stores and restaurants, what they have to do to bring those tomatoes into the U.S. marketplace. And let me tell you, it's not a small feat. You've got to achieve a certain quality standard. You have to sell at a certain price. You can't sell below this price. And you have to handle any tomatoes that have issues very, very specifically, right? You have to follow a formula. You have to ensure that they're all accounted for. And so all of these rules are part of the suspension agreement. If this agreement goes away, what happens is Mexican tomatoes will have to pay a 21% duty to come into the U.S. That's problematic because our ag industry does not have that type of working capital to put forward those many millions and millions of dollars to keep those loads flowing. And so what that means is it will significantly drop down the volume. And let me give you an idea. We are bringing more than 4 billion pounds of tomatoes from Mexico every single year. More than half are crossing in Texas. 1.3 billion cross right here in Pharr. So our communities, our ecosystems have tens of thousands of U.S. jobs that depend on this flow. And it's not just this warehouse that we're looking at, right? Think about the banks. Think about the insurance companies, food safety, all the other industries that support bringing tomatoes across. Those are tens of thousands of jobs that aren't even calculated in that. If we don't maintain this agreement, all of that stands to be unraveled and lost forever. And that's what we're here saying is we need to modernize the agreement. We need to renegotiate it. We don't need to let it go away.
I'm not an expert, but I tend to think this issue flares up every few years. And so who keeps pushing to get the suspension agreement lifted? Who are the antagonists here?
Right. So you're absolutely right. By law and codification, this agreement has to be reviewed every 5 years. That said, you do have a very vocal contingency out of Florida and the southeast states, primarily Florida, that are saying they see that there is unfair trade practices happening in the Mexican tomato industry. Although in the last 30 years, they have been unable to point to any of those unfair trade practices. They say that those tomatoes are being dumped here in the U.S. I'll give you a quick little economy lesson. Dumping means that Mexico is selling their tomatoes cheaper in the U.S. than they're selling them in Mexico. I hope people kind of think about that and go, wait a minute. You're saying Mexico is putting tomatoes in a box on a truck, paying all the other fees, paying inspections, meeting a minimum price, and selling tomatoes in the U.S. cheaper than Mexico? It's very hard to fathom. Anyway,
that's not happening.
That's not happening. And that's what's driving this, right? Is again, you have these Southeast producers saying they're losing ground, they're unable to compete, they're unable to sell their tomatoes because they have to compete alongside the Mexican tomato industry, who has this diverse variety, has a lot of volume, but more importantly, who has really made a lot of investments in their infrastructure. Mexico's tomato industry has invested billions of dollars in greenhouses, sophisticated varieties, flavorful tomatoes that we don't grow and can't grow here in the U.S. And so we don't want to lose that access.
Yeah, you were asked in the Q&A here, a reporter asked you, why can't these be grown here? And you say we haven't got the weather, the climate. But surely if the folks in Florida and the southern states are pushing for this to be ended, they must think they can grow tomatoes in that part of the country.
So I won't speculate as to what they assess would be the options or availability for them were the agreement to go away. But I can tell you it becomes a simple matter of math. There are only a few regions in the United States where you can grow anything during the dead of winter, right? You don't have to be a genius to know you're not going to grow much when there's snow on the ground. South Texas is one of those places. South Florida is one of them, as is Southern Arizona. But we only have the soil to really grow certain things. More importantly, you need infrastructure, right? The tomatoes behind me were mostly grown in greenhouses. Those greenhouses protect the tomatoes from too much rain, too much sun, from too much wind damage. They protect them from bugs and disease, and they produce a different kind of tomato. More importantly, they are growing those tomatoes at a time of year when the rest of the U.S. simply can't do that. And so we are already maxed out at what we can grow here in the U.S., whether it's water, whether it's labor, whether it's the availability, the option to turn a profit. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying that the economics simply are not there to transplant the same production in Mexico here to the U.S.
How are you getting on delivering that message up in Washington to the members of Congress? There's possibly a regional fight there. Some members of Congress,
right,
with Florida, some with South Texas. How are you doing in ensuring that you're successful with this program?
Right. So very well said. Yes, it is very much a regional fight. It's largely the Florida contingency against California, Arizona, and Texas. And so that's why that's part of the reason we held the press conference today, was to begin by educating our state. We are already involved in speaking with our representatives, both in the House and in the Senate. I spent yesterday in Austin educating our state officials on this issue, letting them know how important it is to the state. We are going to continue to advance that message. And in the next week or so, you're going to see that message expand beyond Texas as we start to reach out to all the other states, because they need to understand these tomatoes aren't just eaten here in the U.S. aren't eaten just here in Texas. They're eaten in all the U.S. More than 47% of all the tomatoes eaten in this country are coming through Texas.
Right.
That is huge.
You say you went up to Austin to educate the state leaders, but it is in fact a federal issue. Can the state leaders help?
They can. Everybody can help. And that's why we're talking about this. Everybody has a voice. Everybody can talk to their neighbors and go to their elected officials and go to everyone and say, hey, you hear about the suspension agreement? I did. We got to keep it, right? Yes, we do. That's the conversation that needs to happen. That's why we're educating them, because they in turn can put pressure upwards to our elected officials in D.C. and encourage them to make the right decision.
Well, Dante, those were the questions I had. Is there anything I've missed? Anything else you'd like to add?
Absolutely. So we kind of touched on it, but anybody reading, anybody listening, anybody taking the time to hear us out needs to act. You need to share the message that if you enjoy tomatoes, you've got to tell your elected officials. Keep the tomato suspension agreement. Keep Texas strong, keep America strong, and keep us healthy and eating tomatoes.
Thank you so much for today's interview.
You got it. Thanks, Steve.